What is going on, Sharp Football family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Rebar, and we are here back after hopefully everyone had a really good Memorial Day weekend, caught those 3 days. We're back on a Tuesday morning, bright and early here. As a reminder to everyone, a little housekeeping out of the way at the top. As always, you can head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can get that 2024 Warren Sharp preview book, pre-order that already on the site. As a reminder, too, you can also get the fantasy football guide that myself and Raymond Summerland are cranking out. Plenty of details in already. You can use promo code SAVE5 for that. With that all out of the way, let me bring our guest in. He doesn't really need a whole lot of introduction here. A Hall of Famer from Football Guys. You hear him on Sirius XM. Mr. Bob Harris, how are you this lovely Tuesday morning, Bob?
I'm fantastic. Holding up well. A little weather here in Dallas that we've been dealing with. But I just want to say that that intro music is the only thing I've heard in a long time as smooth as you. So well done on that choice.
Yeah, it is. It has like a very sultry, almost like a late 80s soap opera kind of intro. I kind of like
waiting
that.
for Barry White to start saying something.
Yeah, I love it. Let's jump into some things here because I get the pleasantries kind of all out of the way. Now, I want to be careful, Bob, because I don't want to, out of the box, label you old, because you are one of the younger souls in the industry. Absolutely. If anyone has met Bob, he is high energy and he can give us all a run for money. You're probably going to outlive us all too, to be honest. Definitely. I'd bet it gets me outliving you at this point too. But you're seasoned. You've been playing fantasy football a long time, and we are in this kind of period now where post NFL draft, we're before kind of like OTAs in June and then training camp start. We're in kind of this almost last little bit of what you would say a dead space or dead period is for football news. But we still have, I worked at Roto World, so I know in those dog days of trying to come up with blurbs, and you're trying to just scour the ends of the earth for anything to put on the site at this point. And how do you handle this period when you get news? Because we still see something will get tweeted by Schefter or Rappaport and or a beat reporter, and people will run wild with it, in the days of Twitter. So how do you kind of handle those things throughout this dead space period where really nothing's happening, but then we're trying to make things that are happening?
I think, just society as a whole, in 1,000 years when they're sifting through the ashes, what will they say? Well, their inability to react to any single thing with a calm, reasoned approach is probably what hit them in. It's the same thing for fantasy managers, right? I mean, you can see it right now in the best ball rooms if you're out there roaming through them, as I know you are. There'll be just a blurb, and you'll see a player's ADP, fluctuate just based on a simple thing. Here's how we need to look at that this time of year. And I'm not averse to that because we're drafting in the moment, but I think of best ball drafts, and all the drafts I'm doing now are just an effort to steep myself in the subject. So I have a really high comfort level when the drafts that matter most come, and those will be in August. But not that my best ball drafts don't matter now; they do. And I put an effort into it before, but it's more experimentation at this point, and trying to find lanes and paths and players that maybe are will come in handy later on down the road, and also to be prepared for that moment when you're caught short. Someone snipes you directly in front of you, and you're not. Instead of making a panic move, you just go, "Oh yeah." Boom, you throw down the next guy, right? So, but this information should all be taken for what it is. It's a single piece of data in a long string of data, right? And it's informing us as we go along. And for me, it kind of started with with a scouting combine where every GM and coach comes out and there's a lot of flag planting that goes on there. The entire truth isn't told, but a lot of truths are told, and you learn a lot of things and plans. And even if you don't learn the whole truth, you have things to compare against, and it kind of sets a baseline. So I'm watching for these blurbs and all the little pieces and bits of information we get. How does that compare to what I've heard? Does it move what I've heard forward? Does it put the kibosh on something I've heard? Does it make me look at things in a new way? And that's kind of how you look at it. And I look at it all the way up through the start of the season. Even, the training camp ones are the ones that get us. I mean, we're throwing some chum in the water, right? And we're all sharks. We'll just race towards it. So I try to be a little more careful about that because I do try to take a more big picture approach. And I think obviously that's a wise approach. It doesn't always happen even for me, especially when it's players you're already invested in or you're already down on, and you get that confirmation bias. You go, aha, I knew it. But even still, you should always look at everything as for what it is: a single moment, a snapshot in time of that day, of that practice, of that session, and plug it into the bigger picture and try and gain a better understanding of what the bigger view is. Is this matching what I've been told all along? Is it match, or the reports coming out, bearing up the fact that the coaches want this outcome? And I think we work a lot, Rich, on, I work a lot on, what's the desired outcome? I mean, anything can happen. The season's a crazy thing.
Yes.
It's nuts. It's an oblong spheroid. It bounces funny ways just by design. That's a starting point, right? And you should remember that when you're drafting players and you're assembling teams, that everything's going to change. And we all know this. But you have to have a starting point. You have to be somewhere to begin with. And so take all, and maybe use these little bits of information as little hedges and little pieces that'll help you move forward and navigate things. But don't, no single bit of information is a determining thing unless it's a season-ending injury or whatever. I mean, that's what everything is. It's a continuum of data up to the point it's not, up to the point you have resolution. And sometimes we don't get that until the end of the season.
Yeah. No, I love that. A lot of gamers, I think, that obviously has this, field is expanded, and I'm guilty of this as well, because I'm in a vortex where I'm trying to create unique content and content that stands out. But a lot of these things are like the old Bud Kilmer thing, like stick to the basics, hitting him in the head, James Vanderbeek, right. And we're trying to find all of these kind of like random, like micro edges where a lot of the times you want to step back, look at the macro kind of outlook here. We do have a couple guys like in the kind of that I do want to pick some of these things that have happened in the news, like recently, I guess news, air quotes it here, but things that we've had kind of coaches, come out in support, or, kind of some actual reporting on something that happened. Because I will say this from the Roto World days as well, you want to focus on things that are actual reporting. Like you don't want to get into the weeds on like a beat reporter says like Pat Freiermuth could catch 100 passes this year. Like that's not actual reporting. That's an opinion. You want to find these, these things that are coming directly from a coach, or like a usage of someone's at practice. This guy was ahead of this guy in the red zone, things like that. Actual reporting. We did have last week Sean McVay come out, and remember, these are all voluntary workouts right now, but Sean McVay came out and said that Kyren Williams wasn't going to be there because he's dealing with a little bit of a foot issue. And, obviously gamers, when you look at the history of Kyren Williams, a short history of the past, 2.5 years, like he's dealt with a lot of lower body stuff. And it's been kind of this negative feedback loop that Kyren Williams has kind of been in. He's one of these players that is continuously kind of just like kept falling. He's just inching back. Where do you think that like Kyren Williams ultimately like it stops, or where does it stop for you? Like, is he now turned into like the supreme value? How are you handling the situation? Because gamers, obviously we've seen guys like, Justin Forsett or the James Robinsons, these guys kind of come out of this late draft capital or kind of out of nowhere, have these like awesome RB1 seasons, and then kind of like, disappear in a sense. So like, is Kyren Williams in that bucket for you? Is he a guy that now is a value? Like, how are you just handling Kyren Williams in general?
He's heading towards value, right? I mean, I'm the guy who's going to, I'm the fantasy fireman. I'm going to chase that, run into that burning building of value and drag the body out as he's, everyone else is going, no, I can't touch, because that's, how you gain edges. But I will say, for me, more and more as in recent years, it's become apparent. And I mean, it should have been apparent all along, but volume is the key for running backs. I mean, that's the single most important attribute they have, right? I love that they can run fast and cut well and catch balls and pass block, but until they get volume, none of those things matter. And Kyren Williams last year was a true demonstration of that. I mean, the games he played in was super impressive in that regard, but especially down the stretch after he returned from the injury. I think he averaged like close to 20 throughout the season, but after he returned from that injury, it was up 25 touches a game down the stretch. And, he was giving you league winning output. And I think that's the thing that made him so valuable. So we'll see the price drop, and it probably should. If it gets into the third round, I will be a sucker. I will be unable to avoid that. I don't see him falling that far yet, but it's trending that direction. And look, this could be a serious issue. This is the time of year we find out about these things we had not previously heard of. The addition of Blake Corum, super productive at Michigan, and super capable of coming in and maybe handling a high volume role, adds to that concern. But, I'm going to tend towards the side, especially this time of year, of being maybe a little over aggressive on these things, right? I want to take advantage of the fears of other people at this point. And look, and if they're well founded, and it turns out as we head closer to the season, I'll make those adjustments as we get closer, as the actual season begins. But for now, I'm going to tend towards being more aggressive on those kind of plays.
Yeah, I think when you look at Kyren Williams too, what makes this so unique is that this has just been such a desirable spot. You
Right.
know, and I know
Cam
that
Akers.
we've had a rotation since Todd Gurley of this Rams backfield, but I mean, any running back that has been even the 1A in this offense has been such a good fantasy boon. I mean, you got guys like CJ Anderson. It's not just Kyren Williams,
Right.
Cam
Rolling off
Akers,
the couch.
you know, Malcolm Brown, you know, Daryl Henderson. Like it's a lot of bodies that have been productive for us in a fantasy stance, you know, under Sean McVay in this offense. That's what makes it so desirable, is because the ceiling can be so high for this one position that, you know, yeah, is he going to fall into like maybe a draft area where like historically we want to be cautious on running backs, right? Like there is downside on those running backs that aren't the elite running backs. We found that out, right? Like over the, you know, the dead zone's gotten a big push. You know, we've seen the way people are drafting an underdog the past 2 years, 2.5 years. We want those wide receivers. The room is now cognizant of it. But I do think that, you know, Blake Corum, when you look at it like from like a 10,000 foot view, we always knew the Rams are going to add a running back because their depth behind Kyren Williams was exposed last year. When Kyren Williams missed that time last year, the Rams backfield behind him was the worst in the NFL. You know, non-Kyren Williams running backs were dead last in the NFL, 3.3 yards per carry. They needed more insurance behind him. And, you know, obviously what makes the situation interesting from a Blake Corum perspective, though, is this is one of the few running backs that Blake Corum actually like athletically measures up to.
Right.
And that wasn't going to be always the case for a lot of incumbents. And that's what kind of makes this kind of an interesting like push or pull situation. But I do think if you started off wide receiver, you know, heavy, if you didn't get Christian McCaffrey, now you've gotten a Jamar Chase, a Tyreek Hill, see them your flavor of choice there. It does make Kyren Williams a lot more appealing to those teams now where he's available, you know, at that 2-3 turn.
Right. And that's where he's headed for right now. Right now, he's around 23 or something on Underdog. And Blake Corum's still available in the double-digit rounds. And a lot of us are out there, when you see something that cheap. A lot of times when we look at these backfields that we expect to be split, I'll take the cheapest piece. I don't expect this to be split as long as Williams is healthy, but as long as there's some question about it. And like we've seen, this is like, Williams is only the latest example you mentioned. Cam Akers before was like running back 2 down the stretch the year before. So,
with Baker Mayfield, like not even a good offense.
Right. So, I mean, it's just like, this has been gold. So it's worth paying up a little bit, take the chance on it.
Yeah, absolutely. One other guy we had to get a little bit of news, positive news. Who was in that supreme negative feedback loop for 2 years is Jameson Williams. Basically, since Jameson Williams has entered the NFL, nothing positive has been said about him. From Dan Campbell, very little has been said positive. He obviously starts his career with the ACL injury. That year, he came back as a rookie. He looked behind. There were some questions about his effort. Last year, he starts the year with a suspension, can never kind of really get on the field. And we saw him in the playoffs have his like 2 highest, games of route participation in the NFL. The run out's been good. Josh Reynolds leaves. They don't draft a wide receiver. They've only got Donovan Peoples-Jones as like a veteran. Dan Campbell comes out last week and kind of has some positive thoughts about Jameson Williams. So like now, Is this a hopium situation? Is it a situation where you kind of are in on Jameson Williams? I have some dynasty teams that maybe Hopi at least can recoup some value, that I can maybe make some action, take some action on this news. Or is this maybe just a situation where it's still like, you're kind of paused, you still want to see it?
It's a little hopium. But I mean, I would love to see it, but obviously in dynasty leagues you're invested in, and there's tons of hopium going around right now because there's maybe a path to workload. That's what these players need. We know, the pedigree is there, and we know what the Lions think of him. He just hasn't delivered on it. We've seen those brief flashes, but this is the job, Rich. We sit here and we tell ourselves, either happy stories about the players we want to select or less happy stories about the players we don't want to. In this case, you could tell all kinds of happy stories about Jameson Williams playing in this offense where he doesn't have to be the focal point, gives them opportunities. The defenses are going to be watching, the obvious pieces of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam LaPorta, the backfield. There's room here. And Jared Goff, especially when he's on the road, is super good at finding his guys downfield. And I do believe, and the price is right? Like, I think I want to see he's wide receiver 48, 49 on Underdog right now. That's always the key for me. If I can get him as a wide receiver 4, I'm not especially worried about, whether the outcome happens or not. I'm playing more for the possibility this time of year.
Yeah, I like that. I do think he's gonna have a hard time still, at least like at best being the third, third in targets. And that doesn't mean you can't run him, especially an Underdog like these,
right. I think that
weeks.
that's what makes him a great best ball play, right? Because I mean, like in redraft, am I as interested in him as my wide receiver 4? Probably not, right? But and that depends on how you construct your rosters too, right? If you have a super conservative early play at wide receiver and you have lots of consistent weekly producers, you've got every Keenan Allen in the world there, and you need a little dash upside. Jameson Williams might provide it at a reasonable price.
Yeah, and I think when you're drafting, from a best ball stance, where you're going to take Jameson Williams, obviously on these teams that you didn't take,
right.
Amon-Ra St. Brown or Sam LaPorta, because you want to use him as kind of like his upside outcome is contingent on those guys having downside. So you want to kind of, bridge those two worlds. I am hoping that we continue to get this drumbeat, not just for my dynasty bags here that I would like to maybe even potentially like kind of tear up or do something, but there are also a couple guys I think under him that I still think are flying below the radar. A guy that I saw outright project and have higher than him is Rashid Shaheed, and who definitely probably could be the wide receiver 2 in his offense. So I'm kind of hoping Jameson Williams keeps distracting gamers from Rashid Shaheed as well. So definitely keep that in mind.
I think there's tons of guys. I mean, Demarcus Robinson, we were talking about the Rams. If you look at his numbers down the stretch last year, or at least the last quarter of the season, he was a major player and, came through with some big numbers. I don't know that role remains the same, but I don't think it goes away. I think he's locked in as the number 3 receiver there. And as long as all the other pieces are healthy and viable, I'm looking at you, Matthew Stafford. I think that he's a free square play on Underdog right now. You're getting him close to the last round.
Yeah, and the Lions, we've talked about it a little bit since the schedule. They only play 3 games outdoors this entire season. Obviously that's, everyone's cited the golf indoors, outdoor stuff for his career. I think a lot of that, some of that's a little noisy, but it is what it is. It still helps that Detroit's playing all these indoor games.
For sure.
We'll take it. One little last bit of news here that we kind of had last week was that, the Packers are trying to kind of, reconfigure Christian Watson's hamstrings. There's a report that came out that, they did some testing on him and he had a 20% muscle mass difference between his left leg and his right leg. Now it's down to like 8 and 10% more balanced. We saw Alvin Kamara go through like a similar procedure. I don't know if a procedure is even the right medical term. Right. I apologize to all my doctors out there. I am not one on this podcast or play one in real life. But we saw Alvin Kamara go through the same thing. And, he claimed that he had more bursts. It didn't result in any results on the field. Christian Watson in general, is this like, are we ready to be hurt again? Is this like more of a Will Fuller situation? Obviously, Will Fuller was a guy who kind of kept us bringing back the siren song because whenever he played was good. And we saw this with Christian Watson again last year. As crowded as this Packers wide receiver room was, when Christian Watson was on the field fully healthy, he was the leader. I mean, his first game back, that he played tangible snaps, he had 90 yards. We saw the 2 games before he got hurt and re-injured and kind of was never the same again. He torched the Kansas City Chiefs in that Sunday night game, and then on Thanksgiving Day had the 90 yards and touchdown. How are you handling Christian Watson? Because I'm looking at him. He's another guy. He goes 1 pick ahead of Jameson Williams.
He's wide receiver 47 right now.
Yeah, 1 pick ahead of the guy we talked about, and kind of is in that same bucket. Like, are you ever going to get him right in redraft? But in these underdog drafts, are you ready to be hurt again, Bob?
Look, I can't get over that that 7 touchdown over 4 game run as a rookie. I mean, like, he's the difference maker. He's the lottery ticket in this offense. So I like Jane Reed. Yes, I prefer him. So I'm not like overly enthusiastic. Dontavius Wicks is like one of the plays I like because he's super cheap. But if you think about Watson as kind of a lottery ticket, and especially in best ball, it's a well-priced lottery ticket, right? If you get him for a full season, you're going to get some pretty good numbers, I'm guessing. So yeah, I will play. Let's say this: I will have a heck of a lot more Christian Watson than I have Jameson Williams.
Yeah, there you go. I would totally echo those sentiments as well. In general, like you brought up Dontavian Wicks, as a teaser, we'll talk about a couple maybe nebulous situations. So is it just a cost thing? Is Wicks your outright favorite play, or is it just
it's just totally costing? And like that informs a lot of my favorite plays, right? If I'm looking at an ambiguous, whether it's a backfield or receiving core, a lot of times I'll go with the cheaper pieces and try and build some safer pieces or some more certain roles in with earlier picks. And I think that's a reasonable way to do it. I mean, if you're, you can have a risk on your roster without having a risky roster. And guys like Wicks look like he looks like he has the ability to be as good as anyone on that team. We'll see if he can earn the playing time and put up the consistent numbers. I love this offense in general. I go back to, like the whole Jordan Love situation. We were going into last year and there was a lot of questions about him. And in my mind, the question was this: how stupid are the Packers? Well, I don't think they're very stupid. I mean, you don't let a 4-time NFL MVP kick his way out the door, no matter how acrimonious the situation is, without believing you have somebody who can at least do a reasonable job of replacing him. It would be irresponsible. So I was kind of keen, and look, Love got lucky with the touchdowns early, but he ramped it up over the season. But it reminded me of something Brian Gutekunst said in June. You didn't bring in a big name receiver. Said, no, we want our young quarterback to build with our young receiving core. I love that idea of that. And it showed me the confidence the Packers had in those pieces. And I think that extends all the way down, maybe even to Bo Melton. I mean, I'm not out there drafting him, but I think they have a lot of pieces that they feel comfortable with playing. And Wicks is one of the cheaper ones, is one I'm comfortable playing.
Yeah, no, I like that. And Wicks, ironically looks a lot like on the surface, like how a guy brought up Rashid Shaheed did last year coming in, right? Was efficient, but we were kind of like, well, where's the playing time come, right? Like, how does he consistently get the playing time? And it feels very similar like that. Because, he was a guy, he only ran 20 routes last year with both Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson on the field last year. And I know everyone wants Romeo Doubs to go away, but like, he's like Green Bay Gabe Davis. Like, he ain't going away, man.
He's not going away.
And he was their best player in the playoffs too. So I think we'll see a rotation of those Green Bay guys. And that also might be a way they keep Christian Watson's hamstrings, intact, keep going, is that they don't maybe burn him out and have to rely on him to have that, because they've developed this deep kind of rotation. Even at the tight end position, you can make an argument
for sure.
We might see those guys kind of rotate.
I feel like I have way too much Luke Musgrave, and Tucker Kraft is going to destroy me at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the way I play the Packers mostly I think when we get to August is I'll be more into just saying, like, I'm just going to attack it from the Jordan Love angle instead of trying to sort out like exactly what week and what guy is going to be. Yeah. But
I think when we do, that's exactly right. Like, and this is a big thing for especially people like us and people who are just like rolling out the best balls. There comes a point where you have to make that pivot from the best ball mindset to the redraft mindset to the and making the right decisions. And like, I do think redraft or best ball sets you up great for redraft, especially at the top end. I mean, things tend to remain mostly the same, but there comes a point where, you're making best ball plays, and you're also, you're drafting 1,000+ teams. You've tried every single thing, and you get to a point where you're just looking for shares of players you don't have yet. You have to shift out of that as you get ready to go into your redraft leagues.
Yeah, I mean, outside of even the portfolio building aspect where you might draft players based on just exposure in terms of like maxing out, your opportunities, but also just like a reason I have always liked best ball, and I'm not super into the weeds. Of a guy like we have Todd Burrows on the site who's playing thousands of these leagues, but I don't get in that much. I'm in the hundreds, but like the reason I like best ball so much is like you've kind of hinted at a few times, is that it's just like I'm in the batter's box, I'm constantly like not fooled when I get to August, because I've done so many drafts. I understand that, hey, if I missed out on this player, this is where the next subset of guys go. You have a pulse of, where guys move throughout the context of the news we get, like the ebb and flow, like we talked about the news of, this guy's gone back like 6 spots, he's gone up 6 spots, whatever. And those live reps, like, are what matter most,
100%. The reps are written, and the players that you love, the players that I feel like I just need to have. I know how far up I have to climb the ladder. I'm looking at you, Anthony Richardson. I'm looking at you, Derrick Henry. I'm coming. I got your back. But that's the thing. You learn, pretty early on where you have to move. And like, we need to remember ADP is average draft position is when players are getting drafted. That's not when you have to draft them, right? Don't be
or your next specific draft where they'll go.
Don't be a prisoner of that.
My father-in-law, he plays fantasy still, but he plays very small, right? A couple leagues, doesn't really do a lot. And he'll like go on in August to do like some mock drafts on some sites. And then he immediately tells me every time, he's like, the draft didn't go like those went. Small sample size, one draft. And he's only done a few mock drafts. Whereas, we're doing these best ball drafts, and, you're doing hundreds of them over the course of, from February to August. You're not going to be fooled when the rug gets pulled on you, like when a guy goes ahead or like there's a position run you didn't account for. You're able to kind of combat that, and because you've had all those, all that experience over the course of the offseason. One little pocket I think that's interesting in like in where drafts are now, and we'll see if it holds till August, is obviously we know wide receivers are kind of the name of the game. They're going higher than ever, and they're going to go higher in August still than it's not like this is just going to like subside.
No,
because we talked about some of the guys, right? Like, you don't want to be in your August draft and have to be forced into a situation where Jameson Williams is now your wide receiver 3, or a guy like Christian Watson is your wide receiver 3, and you have to get those guys right on a weekly basis. So we're going to continue to see wide receivers drafted high. One little pocket I think that's very interesting, and we see this, happen all the time at this time of the year because everyone's coming hot off a dynasty. We're doing rookie drafts. Rookies have kind of higher ADPs than I think we'll see maybe come August. But we have this little pocket of wide receiver ones, or at the end of the wide receiver ones, where it's Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Drake London all going in a row. Wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 10. These are all guys that are more there based on projection. We believe that the talent is there for these guys. I want to know how you're handling that group. Do you have a favorite of those three? Are you skipping those three and maybe taking a Devontae Adams? I want to know, because that's a very interesting trio of guys.
I do end up with a lot of Devontae Adams. I'm going to acknowledge that right off the bat. But I do like those three players. And aside from the fact that two of them have quarterbacks that are older coming off Achilles injuries, I'm assuming though, I think we're working under the assumption, and I think it's okay to do that this time of year, right? Because you'll be able to make that adjustment if something arises. And we can get into the whole Falcons thing and Michael Penix. I mean, I know everyone was outraged by that pick. I'm less outraged because I'm not a Falcons fan. I'm a fantasy player, and I want a piece in there that can keep the values of the players I invest in afloat if something happens to Kirk Cousins. So I was fine with that. But I do like Drake London. I mean, I liked him as the top rookie wide receiver of the year he came out. And I think that offense has obviously not been what I expected, what any of us expected. Even Arthur Smith, probably. And mostly due to the instability at quarterback. And I think having some stability there in Kirk Cousins is going to do wonders for him. Also, Kirk Cousins is super productive every single year, right? 31 touchdowns a year since whenever, right? Until last year. And he was on track to best that number and 4,000 plus yards. So like Zach Robinson is a single collar. I like them probably Garrett Wilson, Drake London, and Marvin Harrison Jr. in that order. I don't have anything against Harrison. I think this is as high, a lot of faith in this, people. But I do like what I saw in that Drew Petzing offense. I thought Kyler Murray came out for an offense that he has never worked with. I mean, guys have been playing in air raid since he was 2 years old, right? And he came out in this, more traditional offense. I thought he looked really good. I thought he put a lot of effort into it, and I'm pretty enthusiastic about Marvin Harrison Jr. too. So I would probably go put him at the tail end of that. But if you're playing for the upside, I have no problem drafting him. But I like Wilson the most. I just think he's a target monster as long as Aaron Rodgers is in the locked and upright position. And I'm I don't go into drafts, thinking people are going to get hurt. I'm injury agnostic. I know, not stupid. I mean, I realize there are players that, have maybe, chronically injured is not a chronic injury. I'm more worried about the latter than the former. If I was worried about the latter, who would still be drafting, I don't know, Christian McCaffrey after the run early in his season, right? So I think that I'm going to be drafting a lot of Garrett Wilson. I love his value there. And I think the targets are going to be monstrous.
Yeah, I'm in on both of those guys as well. Harris really draft a lot just because it's so rich, but I get it, right? Like I do get it because you look at where wide receiver kind of falls off. I mean, it's kind of a very nebulous situation where you're talking about guys like, Deebo Samuel, Drake London, Devontae Smith, and a lot of those guys play with another good wide receiver. And it's what's kind of kept them in like that wide receiver 2 that moonlights as a wide receiver 1. When you think of both the 49ers guys, because when one of the 49ers guy misses, the other guy always goes nuclear. We've seen, Devontae Smith with AJ Brown at the field for a small sample, and he went off. We've seen Jalen Waddle with Tyreek Hill off the field. Even go back to the game where they faced the Jets last year, and he just absolutely he crushes those guys. You got
I think it's interesting. Malik Nabers is wide receiver 20 is someone I find really appealing because I think if there's. It's funny. You mentioned something too, that we're all drafting a certain way right now. You see that after a season, we all remember the lessons, right? They're like vivid in our mind. And you see in February, March, the early best ball drafts that those lessons really play out. Then you see as August draws near, we all crouch back into our comfortable, former places and do the things we've always done. I noticed that a lot, but I think, for a guy like Malik Nabers, the thing I've learned in recent years is less than ideal quarterback play does not mean no quarterback play. Mike Evans would like you to know last year that if you were not drafting him, you didn't work out well. But this is not a new thing. We can go back to Amari Cooper playing with Jacoby Brissett for half the year, ended up as a wide receiver 1. We go back to the concerns about DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and they both ended up being close to wide receiver 1s 2 years ago with Geno Smith. So I don't think I think we tend to overplay in our mind the quarterback situation when it comes to talented wide receivers, maybe more than we should. And so I think Nabers is a guy that I'm going to have a lot of shares of as wide receiver 20.
Yeah, I love that shout because I think, especially when you look at where Nabers wins, where his game translates to the
Right.
NFL. I mean, he's a versatile player. He's great after the catch. And when you put that with where Brian Daboll coaxed kind of the best out of Daniel Jones a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, not versus small sample last year, where he had trouble, throwing to a guy like Jalen Hyatt. Like, that's not his game. But I think Daboll and Daniel Jones are going to be able to facilitate enough shorter to intermediate targets for Nabers to kind of accentuate like his ability after the catch.
Yeah, look how that works out for CD Lamb. I mean, right, like
Right.
he's almost unstoppable in those situations. You can see Neighbors having a similar impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that shout. And the Drake London stuff, and it's not just the getting the Kirk Cousins factor and I think this offensive change you brought up, Zach Robinson, is just so huge, and not just a dunk on Arthur Smith, because Arthur Smith does what he does, but this coaching tree that Zach Robinson comes from, and obviously Kirk Cousins was a part of this with Kevin O'Connell as well. So it should be a seamless transition for Kirk Cousins as well, kind of knowing where to go with the football. But what this does for Drake London is I think it gets a lot of people now 2 years removed forget what Drake London was as a prospect coming out of USC. And he did a lot of those things we just talked about with Nabers. He was a guy that got some of that manufactured production at USC, was good after the catch. And I think we're going to see him operate in a lot more of that regard in this Zach Robinson offense. There's a lot of free squares in this offense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And they're going to get, and Kyle Pitts is going to get free squares too. I know he's like Voldemort in the fantasy streets. Like, we're not allowed to say Kyle Pitts.
I will say it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that, maybe bring him up again. But yeah, I love that. I love that shot. But I find that trio of wide receivers is very interesting. When you take one of those guys, do you find yourself incentivized because you took one of those guys to just go back to back wide receiver and maybe not go running back?
Probably yes. Probably yes. I think more often than not I do. And like, I mean, we all know there's flavors, there's players of every flavor at every level. And, you just kind of resign yourself to, okay, I'm taking this approach to start out with. This is the range of running backs I'm going to end up with, or these are the tight ends or the range of tight ends I'm going to end up with. And it just depends on how you build your roster. But yeah, if you start out with one of those guys, I want a little more certainty after that.
Yeah, that's usually I'm double dipping at that point. If I take London, it's probably not going to be like a London Saquon team or something like that. Saquon might be more of like a guy where I'm trying to get like you said, Devontae Adams maybe in that area. We're trying to pair them up. I love that though. But I was hinting at it though. I want to know how you're handling the tight end position this year, because obviously a lot of people, have LaPorta one. I'll ask you if do you have Sam LaPorta like clear tight end one?
No.
Okay. See, that's why. Yeah. That's
right. Well, I mean, like, yes, he is my tight end one, but is it clear? No, I will vacillate as the season. What I mentioned about just going back to our comfortable positions, at some point I could see myself going back to Travis Kelce, because I think, we tend to, like last year was not a great year for the Chiefs offense. They've added some pieces, I think, that work in the favor of both Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy. I think those are some nice pieces for an offense that the ADOT's gone down, obviously, noticeably. Last year, I think was Patrick Mahomes' lowest overall since Tyreek Hill left, and adding a little bit more of that downfield throws into the mix is going to work in Travis Kelce's favor. So I don't want to overplay it. And also, Sam LaPorta leaned heavily on a double-digit touchdown season. 10 touchdowns is, and we all, like to sit here and say those are the most volatile of statistics. Well, we say it for a reason, because they do tend to be. So that would be that would be the only concern. Like, I'm still drafting LaPorta ahead of Travis Kelce, but I'm not like totally hurt if somebody else grabs LaPorta and I say, okay, path is open, doors open for me. And I love McBride too. I just, you wonder if the target share, it was so immense last year, that he was another volume play. Is it going to be the same with Harrison there?
Yeah, I mean, I also have LaPorta like ranked one over Kelce, but like I was originally going to open with Kelce as one because, you mentioned all those things that went wrong, and he still was the tight end one in PPR points per game, and he matched LaPorta in half-point PPR points per game with all those things going wrong. But I think if you're just looking at it from like an objective stance, like you're going to bet on the career arc of the player.
Yes.
Of Sam versus the guy that's going to be 35 in October. Yep. And his snaps have gone down 5 years in a row. And that would be like a tiebreaker for me. But I also look at it, and I look at LaPorta, and, he was the lowest scoring tight end one, since 2017. And I look at the gap from him, not necessarily to Kelce, but the rest of the field as well. And that's the area where I've kind of more focused in on this year, at least in early drafts. And I don't know if that's the same for you, but I've been more in that pocket of, the guys that go 25 to 35 picks after LaPorta, the Kincaid, Andrews, again,
Andrews
Baltimore,
is
fantasy Baltimore, and those
now
guys.
Andrews is the guy that I'm going to have an awful lot of. I mean, by the time this is all done, because I still think he's a screaming value where he's going. Injuries were an issue last year. I guess Rashad Bateman could turn into the first round pick they want to be. I think, Zay Flowers is great, but the locked in connection that Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson have is really remarkable when you see it. And also, I mean, just like, I'm not a tape grinder, I'm not out there, but I watch games. And when I see Mark Andrews on the field, he's the best receiver on the field in most games he's playing, right? I mean, not best tight end, best receiving asset on the field, and especially with that simpatico with Lamar Jackson. So it's hard for me to resist him at the price he's going at.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, if you're in those best ball streets, it's easy to stack. You get that allure of the stack as well. And then just the touchdown equity. I mean, he's had over his career, and especially that hurts a guy like Zay Flowers. I think Zay Flowers, only scored 2 touchdowns with Mark Andrews on the field last year, and the rest all came with him off of the field. He just held so much touchdown equity. Rashad Bateman, I'm going to pour one out for. There's a place in the multiverse he would have been good, but we honestly, him like doing that extension with Baltimore was bad for us having any hope.
Right.
It was. We needed him to get like a fresh start somewhere else, not and continue to like be the third target in like a lower volume like passing game. Like, that's not the answer.
I still have some shares of him, but I think I just was in a draft this week where I took him around after I took DeMarcus Robinson. So that's about where we're at.
I mean, the same thing with Treylon Burks. Like, you just want, like, if you're holding on to any hope, like, you just want him to get a fresh start somewhere else. There's no run out where we are. So if you missed out on those guys, like say you missed out on Andrews, do you have anyone you like in like that pocket of like back end tight end ones or like that front end tight end twos? Like, you have anyone?
I like the guys you mentioned. Let's go ahead and go with Pitts, though. I mean, I think, like Kirk Cousins is the obvious hope here. I think we want to look at the numbers. 27% of Cousins' passes targeted tight ends last year while he was locked and loaded. He was in the 5th in the league in that regard. But you look over time, whether TJ Hawkinson, tight end 4 in 2023, despite the ACL, MCL injury. Kyle Rudolph, tight end 10 in 2018. Cousins' first season as a Viking. Washington's Jordan Reed, tight end 3 in 2015. Cousins' first season as a starter there. He's tight end 9 in 2016. Tyler Conklin was tight end 20 with Cousins in 2021. I'm thinking Kyle Pitts can cobble this together. And I know Kate Majuk had some numbers on that. Some really interesting numbers on what Pitts is ranked last among 40 qualifying tight ends with a 67.5% catchable target rate, pairing with Cousins, who has the 3rd lowest inaccurate uncatchable pass rate among 44 qualifying QBs in that span. I mean, this seems like an ideal situation for Kyle Pitts. So yeah, especially since I think he's, a little bit of a value going where he's going. Like, I love Evan Ingram. I don't see, there's a lot of vacated targets in Jacksonville. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to, and Gabe Davis are going to, gobble everything up. But I think Evan Ingram has a really nice path to workload. I think he's easily overlooked, and he tends to go pretty late, and I'm fine with him. But I think there's some, we know what the talent is there with Pitts. And remember, he's still a very young man. We can argue last year that the knee was an issue. He would argue that was an issue, dating back to the year before, that it was never quite 100%. I think we see that with players sometimes, that we should be mindful of it. But yeah, I'll take that chance, assuming Cousins is going to be his quarterback. And again, Zach Robinson having a play caller we all feel pretty comfortable with, that at least that scheme that we're seeing, that works everywhere, people. I mean, you think Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur. I mean, it's portable, it goes everywhere, and it tends to work out well for the pieces involved.
Yeah, I love it. I always try to just bring people back into the context of Pitts, because I understand like the excitement of him as a prospect, and maybe we've fallen short of the ceiling projection so far. But I like to remind people, I mean, he's not even going to be 24 years old until October. Travis Kelce didn't catch his first pass in the NFL until 1 month before he turned 25. Yep. And this is a guy that already has a 1,000-yard season on his resume. He's only 3 months older than Sam LaPorta. Like, context is still key here. Like, this is a very young, prescient, like tight. Like, the story of Kyle Pitts' career is going to extend a lot further beyond these past 2 years. And versus like ADP and people kind of, whether they got, value out of him.
And it's interesting how, tight end is turning into the quarterback of non-quarterbacks, right? Guys playing into their 30s and having great success. And it's not a new thing. Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, what I like to remind you, this is a position where you can excel well into the later years.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Yeah, I mean, you look at that back group of guys, and those guys stand out, as well. I do want to kind of pick your brain here with it, as we approach like the turning point here of rounding third base, so to speak. I want to talk about just the position battles. We didn't talk about the Green Bay wide receivers. You talked about Wicks, and you can play this from a cost stance or just a player
Right.
you're outright you want to talk about, and then we'll just go back and forth on the situation a little bit and talk about them, but. I want to talk about the Houston wide receivers and how you're handling those guys. Obviously, we know CJ Stroud has that great ADP. It's not going to really go any higher. It can't go any higher. But when you look at it from like a top-down stance, both Nico Collins and Tank Dell were at their best when the other one wasn't on the field. Yep. And then we add Stephon Diggs. Like, how are you playing this situation right? Early draft.
I have a lot of pre-Diggs Nico Collins, and probably enough. Right? But I still think the order is pretty much correct. And I talked to Jonathan Alexander from the Houston Chronicle just this last weekend, kind of asked his take as well. And I mean, he still thinks it's going to be Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, in terms of pecking order, and so I'm kind of still going with that. And so maybe it's going to depend on how I'm constructing my roster. Am I looking for the cheaper piece? Tank Dell's not exactly a cheap piece. So that, you're still paying a premium for all of them, but it's a damn good offense with apparently a very good quarterback. So I'm not against it. I'm probably going to end up, as we head closer to the season, having more of the cheaper piece and like a little less Diggs. I keep telling myself, when we look back at Diggs' career, we're going to have a discussion. Was that, 10-game run in Buffalo a blip on the radar, or was that the cliff, right? My feeling at the moment is that's going to be a blip on the radar, that he still has a lot of football left in him. But this is not an ideal situation for him. And I do think Nico Collins has the skills that really CJ Stroud can, and so does Tank Dell, the deep ball ability and the big play ability that maybe, like I know Diggs has it, but the chemistry that's already established with the other two make them slightly more appealing to me. And also, man, I just can't get the picture out of my mind. Nico Collins just running past guys, big, rangy, physical, and just getting down the field. I'm really happy with the shares I have. I'm not sure I'm as comfortable paying for them right now, but I might come around on that as the season draws nearer as well. But probably Diggs will be the one I have the least shares of.
Yeah, I just think from an archetypical stance, like Nico Collins fits that mold of what what these apex wide receivers end up looking like, right?
Agreed.
Like a big physical player. He showed
running
last
past
year
corners,
can run a more diverse route tree than you think. In the proper offense and with a quarterback that can accurately throw in the football downfield. That was the big hang up with his first 2 years in the NFL with Davis Mills and then the gaggle of guys they ran out in 2022, that back half of the year, was just the amount of inaccurate targets he had. We brought that up with Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and you just have a player that can accurately connect with those throws that have lower percentages down the field. Like, it unlocks your fantasy ceiling, and that's what happened with these guys last year. Tank Dell is still a guy, like, where he goes, because anytime CJ Stroud is on something, he talks about Tank Dell.
Yes.
And like to me, I don't want to ignore that. Like, I know that's not like, because I'm a very objective fantasy analyst. I'm bringing you guys all these numbers and do this stuff. But like, it's hard to ignore that every time I see CJ Stroud talk about something, he's talking about Tank Dell, and I'm like this dude clearly they have something.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, we're always looking for those kind of connections. I used to think Josh Allen had that with Stephon Diggs, but apparently something happened there.
Yeah, it's turning into a thing with Stephon Diggs, right? Like he's not quite in the TO zone, but
like there are people who aren't happy unless they're unhappy, right? I mean, they want to have something to grind against, and I'm okay with that. Maybe wears out his welcome. It's interesting. You see players like that don't have that reputation at all. Brandon Cooks going, like teams get tired of him way before we do, right? And he moves on. They get good value for him, but seems like a super great locker room guy and teammate and does all the things you would ask him to do. Yet still he moves around. Stephon Diggs seems like he works at it, and like, okay, I'm done here. Let's go.
And we had T.O., and T.O. was good till
right.
Shit, he was almost pushing 40 and was still good. It did the same mold. Like, I remember T.O. People forget T.O. was on the Bengals, like, the Bills, right? Remember the T.O. Bills days, like, at the end of his career. Let me talk about the Miami running back situation. Devin Achan's a guy, people seem to be in or out on. Are you comfortable taking Devin Achan at RB8, or would you rather have Mostert at RB 28, 29, or Jalen Wright, in the RB 40s? Like, how are you playing that Miami running back situation?
Hello, Jalen Wright. Glad to meet you, sir. I'm going to have a lot of that. I already have a lot of Mostert. I feel like we've been drafting Devon Achan wrong, and I'm drafting him some there, right? but we're drafting him as though he's the lead back in this offense. I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that they want to use him like that. Maybe they do. Maybe he holds up to it. And so I have some shares of that just in case. But I talked a little bit at the top about what the desired outcome is. My sense is after they extended Raheem Mostert, the desired outcome here is he's the primary back and Devon Achane continues to contribute. Look, that doesn't mean he can't be every bit as exciting and dynamic as he was last year, right? But maybe they feel like a heavy workload is not conducive to his continued work. And so they'll go with that. And then you look at, I look at right. I mean, I see the 3 after the 4 and that 40, and I get excited, especially in this offense. But also I see the 210 pounds on the weight side of things. And he just look, I think of guys like Alvin Kamara, just like a guy that can come in and handle a full workload, have the kind of speed they can maximize in that offense. Look, this offense is phenomenal. Don't forget Raheem Mostert. I want to say his top speed last year was 21.68 miles per hour. Devon Achane was 21.98. Tyreek Hill was 22.0102 or something. Everybody's fast there, right? And like they're all within a half mile of each other, a half mile an hour of each other. Raheem Mostert, nobody's catching him still, people. And so don't overlook that. And I'm sure you saw the Jordan Rodriguez article. I thought it was fantastic and just kind of laid out, the things Mike McDaniel's doing to get these guys moving at the line of scrimmage, going against flat-footed defenders. And I know Matt Waldman sometimes talks about it as like almost designing kick return opportunities for your skilled players, right? And it's just, getting them in open space and letting them do their thing. I'll have shares of all of them. I'll have the most of Mostert, but Wright's going to gain a little ground before all is said and done.
Yeah, I think the way I'm playing it, in general is from a top-down stance, especially in best ball, is the Mostert angle because of the touchdown equity.
Yep.
And he's not going to have 20 again.
Nope.
But also when I think about when the Dolphins are primarily inside the 5-yard line, who's going to be the running back on the field in those situations? And it's probably going to be Raheem Mostert. What's funny is you look at Mostert, I don't even think the plan was for him to ever have as many touches as it was last year either. Like I doubt Mike McDaniel came in and said, I'm looking to give a 31-year-old Raheem Mostert the career high in touches.
Right.
It's just the way the situation played out because of all the rotating injuries that backfield had last year. I think the plan is they want to use all of these guys. And I would include Jalen Wright. I don't think Jalen Wright is solely a contingency back.
Agree.
I think he's going to be on the field for at least a small sample. Now, is he going to approach the touch counts of Mostert and Achane when they're healthy? Probably not. But I do think he's going to have a subset of plays that are available for him in the offense. Achane, I just think it's a FOMO thing, right? Like when you look at the players, I mean, this is a guy that averaged almost 8 yards per carry. Like no one's ever done this.
Right.
And when you look at the players that have come the closest to Achane as young players, the two guys that stand out the most are Alvin Kamara and Jamal Charles. And like, you just don't want to miss out on those types of players. So I think it's largely a FOMO thing. And when we get to August, and because right now it's easy to sell yourself on saying, hey, I'll take Achane in best ball. Who gives a shit, right? Like I'm going to get 8 awesome weeks. Like, and
they're week tilting weeks, right? Those good weeks are going to change your entire outlook for that week. And so that's why I do have shares. I totally agree with you.
He averaged 23 fantasy points per game in the games he had double-digit touches. Like just getting to 10 touches, there's going to be games he gets to 10 touches. But when we get to August even, and when people maybe even we could even see him dip a little bit in August because there might be a little bit more of a fear of like outside of the best ball world of like, do I want to pull a trigger on a guy here that I just have to set and forget? And I think that's when I'll want to pounce the most, especially in auction drafts. In auction drafts, especially, he's going to be a guy where you can insulate yourself a little bit from like that opportunity cost. But because
Chris Brooks has a big week in the preseason, we'll all like be rushing towards the other pieces as they plummet.
And there's 2 factors for it. One is, fantasy gamers have had this like hurdle that they have had a hard time getting over where high scoring weeks have a larger impact on winning you games than lower scoring weeks do on losing you weeks. And that's a tough thing for, I think, gamers to get over. They want to think about consistency and stuff like that. And then also Devon Achane, like, to be honest with you, like, because he's a guy, if my opponent has on my Sunday morning and I'm like, my opponent is Devon Achane, I'm like, I'm pretty scared. Like he's just a guy that instills fear. Like
it might change the way you set your lineup, right? You might go
exactly.
That's the thing, especially in redraft. In best ball, you don't have to worry about it, but it does. I mean, I'm looking at in redraft. I'm looking at my opponent's lineup every week and saying, okay, what's the floor I need to hit here? Oh well, Achane's in there. It just rose.
Yeah, it's like, oh, H-Chan, they're playing whoever, so if it's a week, like, obviously, because the Dolphins have, like, slaughtered these bad teams.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, the Dolphins are facing the Commanders this week? Cool. Like, oh, this feels great. Let me get you one last, like, spot, maybe two on the way out. The Chiefs wide receivers. Obviously everyone's kind of waiting to see if there's a shoe that's going to drop with Rashee Rice, and the guy that hasn't had no good news this offseason, but maybe we don't get a suspension this year. Who knows? How are you playing the Chiefs wide receiver room? Because I think when I caught from you, and I'm going to read between the lines of what you said, you're expecting this offense to be a lot better than it was because they couldn't throw downfield last year. And I've talked about this. Patrick Mahomes was 28th in the NFL in throws 10 yards or further downfield last year. That's going to change.
That's going to change. 100% going to change. And when it does, all my shares of Hollywood Brown will be quite happy. Is this the time? Is it finally his turn? We know the talent and the speed are there. Look, again, two guys, on the outside, or two guys working this offense that have that 3 after the 4 that I love so much, or 2 in these cases, there are 2s, 4-2 speed. So we got 4-2-1 and 4-2-7. So I like these plays. I think both of them, you're looking at the current Underdog ADPs, is Marquise Brown, wide receiver 34, Xavier Worthy, a wide receiver 35. We see Chiefs incoming rookies kind of get the ADP rocket strapped to their ass, and they shoot up a little higher than they should. I'm looking at you, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But for good reason. Andy Reid has a great scheme. They've got Patrick Mahomes, all those things. So I probably prefer Brown to Worthy, but I'm not against Worthy either. I'll have shares of both, probably more of Brown right now for that reason. And like, I mostly when I was drafting them, they were right outside the wide receiver range now, 3 range now. They were well outside it when I was really collecting shares, like wide receiver 4 or 5 for Marquise Brown pre-draft. So I'm kind of keen on him at the moment, and we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice. I'm not, I'm kind of agnostic to it right now. I'm not acquiring any shares. The shares I have are enough until we see what happens.
Yeah, I'm with you to, not to be ready to be hurt again. But like, I just think when you look at Hollywood Brown, and maybe this is like, because, I did like Torrey Smith, kind of, right, for that stretch, and hung on a little bit long, Torrey Smith, and don't want to make it like a Ravens overlap thing. But I mean, the past 2 years, he's played with 6 different quarterbacks. None were Patrick Mahomes. 21.6% inaccurate target rate. No wide receiver with as many overall targets as Hollywood Brown the past years has a higher inaccurate target rate. I just feel like at the price, like everything is just lined up. Man. And I think from just an overall, where you look at these 3 wide receivers in isolation, removing the Travis Kelce target share, which we know is going to exist. But when you look at these 3 wide receivers in isolation, Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy, he still is the most kind of complete receiver in terms of where he can win on all levels of the field. Rashee Rice. Yeah, because Xavier Worthy, ironically, when you see the speed, people think he was like probably a guy just catching, bombs, and he wasn't that guy in Texas. His overlap is where Rashee Rice won as a rookie in the screen game, getting these, manufactured targets. So is there going to be a development curve for Xavier Worthy in the NFL running routes with nuance, or just beating NFL zone coverage, obviously, as well? Because obviously the NFL now is like, you're not even getting this man coverage, so I do want to look at Hollywood Brown as ADP, and like, he's just a guy I've been, kind of drafting a lot there as well. Again, look back on us and say, oh, you guys were on Hollywood Brown for like the 5th straight year. Like, so be it. We're going back to the well, Bob.
I am. I'm with you, man.
And one last one. Maybe this doesn't matter at all, but the Cowboys running back room, are you playing it? Do you care? Are you just ignoring it? Are you saying someone has to hit? Are you saying maybe they're still not done? Maybe someone else pops up here in August.
I would love to see Khalil Herbert find a home somewhere where somebody would love him.
We can make a list of guys.
Right, I can make a huge list of guys. But like Ezekiel Elliott, I don't think is done. And I don't think he's done because I watched the Patriots play last year, weeks 13 through 18. Elliott was running back 7. I mean, just again, volume matters. I don't think he's going to get the same kind of volume we saw in New England last year. Rico Dowdle will be a factor there. Maybe Deuce Vaughn. I don't know. I'm not going to get over enthusiastic there, but at the moment, the Cowboys seem to be all in, and the price still doesn't reflect that. So I had to do the all in thing, didn't I, with the Cowboys? That one wasn't even on purpose.
Yeah, I think when you look at Zeke, obviously it's easy just to say like, yeah, I'm just not going to take him, especially his best plays. But like, he can provide, he fits roster builds, right? Like, especially when we get down the line, we're talking about
back 40s, a double-digit play.
Especially when you talk about a redraft stance, when you're taking these wide receiver heavy builds and these 0 RB type teams, you're also going to need to play guys week 1 and week 2 at running back. Like,
For sure.
you know, and Elliott's going to fit those, but you're just going to throw the touches at the wall and say, like, I just need a guy playing, because your contingency bets on those roster builds, or like your longer plays, aren't going to be active yet. Like, they're not going to be firing. So you're going to need those. He's going to fit those types of builds from an early season stance, just because he's going to be on the field playing.
It's a good offense, right? I mean, with a lot of downfield threats and a lot of reasons for defenses to be honest in their approach to defending them. So yeah, I think there's something to be had there at the price. Like, I'm not going to sit here.
Right. Yeah. No, I got to ask, because like a lot of, you know, these guys are just hanging out down here, you know. I'll get you out of here. If you don't have one on the spot, let me know. But is there a player that you want to make just a pitch for? It could be anywhere. The Bob Harris, you know, elevator pitch on May 28th for a player. Do you got one for a guy?
I want to say that, you know, I mean, everyone knows my love for Anthony Richardson. He is the nail. I am the hammer. I will hit that all day long. I will reach up to get him. I think I talked about the lottery ticket. He's the $1 million lottery ticket. He's the huge price. I think Jaden Daniels could be that later. And look, we all know there's risk associated with that. Well, you can mitigate the risk. You don't have to draft one quarterback, people. And if I'm drafting him a little early, there is an entire universe of quarterback twos available well into the double-digit rounds that I feel perfectly comfortable with playing with on any given week. But I think so there's that. But I think we're missing the boat, or I think, you know, maybe we won't be by the time the season started. What is not to like about Derrick Henry? You know, I mean, just you look at this landing spot, and I saw, you know, Tom Munkin talking the other day. Well, if he gets 300 carries, it'll be because we're doing really well. He got 280 carries. He led the league last year at 280 carries. I know he's 30. I also know he's still very fast. Had the 6th highest breakaway rate among all running backs last year. Hit one of the top speeds. Hit over 21 miles an hour, I want to say. I mean, he still got it. And by the way, Tennessee's offensive line was not very good last year. He's going to a much better offensive line. I just think, for me, if there's two players I'm trying to land every draft right now, it's Henry and Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, Henry's a guy. I don't know when we get to August, I'll be drafting a lot of, but right now I think that is mispriced a little bit. And granted, that some of that is just like the ebb and flow of you know, Underdog versus other sites. But you can just talk about it's just supreme fit, you know, being able to play in that RPO game. And the one difference that Derrick Henry has against him versus what we may see happen in Indianapolis with Jonathan Taylor, and we've already seen transpire the past 2 years in Philadelphia, is that the Ravens running backs actually get the football near the goal line.
Right.
And that, you know, we've seen it. Like, the Eagles have been the bottom of the league the past 2 years. It's not just a 1 year thing with the tush push. This is 2 years running now where their running backs have been bottom of the league in carries inside the 5 when from a percentage stance, not like a raw counting stats, like when they get inside the 5.
You're getting the most carries, but not the best carries. And so a point you made, like, you know, I know they were talking, they're not going to run a lot more RPOs in Baltimore because Derrick Henry's there. And you mentioned Jonathan Taylor. I mean, think of the problem in both those cases. Defenders are going to have at the mesh point, you know, trying to make some really hard decisions there with either Derrick Henry or Jonathan Taylor. We'll see it a lot more with Taylor.
Yeah, I think that I have those three guys very much closer, I think, than the field from like an arbitrage stance. I think obviously you have Taylor and Barkley, they're being drafted where they are. They're younger, you know, and they have upside, you know, potentially being in like, you know, really good situations as well. But I think that from the problems you can try to poke away at those guys are what Derrick Henry's problems are, and they're already priced in for Derrick Henry, right? Yeah. You know, and I think he just has more touchdown equity than those guys, because I don't think any of those three players catch like 50 plus passes, and you know, and obviously that's a Saquon. You know,
I would say the last Eagles running back to do that was Miles Sanders, and that was only because every wide receiver was hurt his rookie year, right? I mean, he was like, you know, they always talk, you know, I always thought, like, why don't they use him more as a receiver? They'd rather not use him as a receiver unless they totally have to, and I think it'll be the
Konami code, man. The Konami code works in mysterious ways.
It does.
The running back, these quarterbacks don't have the check down value that other quarterbacks have, because they can get out of the pocket. They can run. They're like, I'm gonna get out and run the football. And like, we're gonna see that with Anthony Richardson. We're gonna see that with obviously with Jalen Hurts. You know, his target rate to running backs has been low the past 2 years. So obviously that's always been a Derrick Henry hang up, but it's also priced in. I just think from an arbitrage stance, he's very much closer to those two players than I think that it's being treated right now.
Totally. And also, I like to draft old guys because I am also old and just have an affinity for that.
Hey, listen, the last 30-year-old running back the Ravens went out and added in free agency turned out to be pretty damn good. Mark Ingram, if you remember, scoring 15 touchdowns his age 30 season when they went and got him. So I'm not going to say history strikes twice, but Derrick Henry, a little more decorated player than Mark Ingram was. Except for, he did get the Heisman. He did get the Heisman. Derrick Henry didn't get a Heisman.
He did not.
I appreciate that. I'll let you out on here. As a reminder, you can go to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can hit that 2024 preview book for more on Sharp. You can hit the fantasy football guide. Use promo code SAVE5. Me and Ray Summer are going to be cranking on content on that all summer long. It's been like more big rankings period for me where you can get all the rankings. Running backs went up today, wide receivers this week. And we'll be cranking the book there. There it is. I'll let you go on that. Good luck, everybody. We'll see you again in June.